I want to tell you one of my favorite stories in modern medicine. It's a story about visionaries. It's a story about men who believed in something bigger than themselves. It begins with one man, a man of faith who had the ability to see God's potential in people, Dr. Jack Huff. 1944, Iwo Jima. Dr. Huff was on the front lines with 70 medics under his lead. He was fresh from medical school, but eager to serve his country. His team risked their lives to save lives every day, pulling wounded soldiers from the battlefield and treating them. Oftentimes they were in the thick of battle with holes in the ground from bombs, running from shell crater to shell crater as they treated the wounded, constantly in danger of getting hit by bullets or shells. Time after time, Jack would get a feeling and run to another shell crater moments before a mortar landed. One time he felt as if someone physically jerked him out of the hole just moments before a mortar landed that would have killed him. Dr. Huff went home that day feeling that he had been saved for a reason. He had a purpose that God was preparing him for. Dr. Huff was a man of God, and he knew that his life was saved for a reason, and after the war ended, he began to search for what that purpose was. God led him somewhere unexpected. He became a surgeon specializing in a groundbreaking type of ear surgery. God gave him an incredible ability, and he traveled the world teaching others his methods. He was famous for doing a surgery that focused on closing the air-bone gap in a person's ear. It was a difficult, microscopic surgery, and most surgeons couldn't come close to fully restoring hearing. He was one of only a handful of surgeons in the world who could close that gap almost completely. They said he was able to see the potential and close it better than anyone else. He wasn't only good at this in surgery, it was also something he was good at with people. Because of his relationship with God, he had a way of seeing potential in others. He believed that God could close the gap between what was and what could be in the lives of others. In the 1970s, Dr. Huff attended a conference where renowned doctors from all over the world were going to share their research on hearing. A researcher named Dr. Bill Hough took the stage to present his findings. He began to describe a new technique he was pioneering, drilling into a person's cochlea and implanting an electrode that would give a deaf person the ability to hear. We've all heard of the cochlear implant now, but at that time, the very idea was considered crazy. Cochlear implants hadn't been invented yet, and what he was sharing was incredibly controversial because it included drilling into the fragile parts of the ear and possibly destroying someone's hearing. And as he was proposing this, in a room filled with highly respected doctors, everyone started booing. They thought he was a fraud, unethical even. He was booed off the stage as he had been year after year. But this year, something was different. Jack saw something in Dr. House, so he stood up in the middle of booing and silenced the entire room. Everyone was shocked, and Dr. House was able to finally share his research with everyone now listening. After it was over, not only did Jack put his reputation on the line by supporting Dr. House, he began a partnership with him that eventually led to the invention of the cochlear implant itself, a miracle device that has helped restore hearing for hundreds of thousands of people. Since that conference, over 300,000 people all over the world have gotten cochlear implants, and they're hearing back. A breakthrough the scientific community thought impossible by an inventor who had been mocked and booed, but who Dr. Huff believed in. Years later, Dr. Jack Huff met another doctor, Dr. Richard Kopke. And true to his form, Jack saw something in Dr. Kopke that he found compelling. It began with their mutual love for Jesus. They worked together during surgeries as Rick learned from Jack. During one of those times, Dr. Kopke shared a passion that he couldn't shake, an inescapable idea he'd had for years. Cochlear implants were an amazing step forward, but they were not enough. It's true that more than 300,000 people have had their hearing restored through this technology, but 300 million people worldwide have hearing loss. You see, when you lose your hearing, it changes everything about you. Jack understood that. He loved to share the story about how a reporter asked Helen Keller which was harder, not having her sight or not being able to hear. She responded by saying that blindness separates people from things, but deafness separates people from people. Both Jack and Rick had seen this firsthand. Hearing loss disconnects you from people, from the very people you love. And as ear doctors, Huff and Kopke watched as soldiers returned home and couldn't connect with their loved ones anymore. And traveling overseas, they met children growing up without hearing, who would never be able to afford a cochlear implant. In the early years, he and Dr. Kopke talked about this all the time as they worked side by side. And Dr. Huff knew deep within him he had found potential in Dr. Kopke. He had found a kindred spirit. He saw potential for the miraculous to happen again. Over the years, Dr. Huff entrusted the Huff Ear Institute to Dr. Kopke, but Huff remained a part of everything. He was the chairman of the board and a personal mentor to Rick. Jack would come in a few times a week to check in and see how the research was going. And for a long time, for years, there was no sign of breakthrough. It was easy to be discouraged. It was easy to believe the dream they were chasing was impossible. At one point, Jack encouraged Dr. Kopke. Remember the disciples in the boat with Jesus? They were in the middle of that storm and were terrified the boat would sink. Rick, when you're in the storms of life, Jesus is always in the boat with you. The storm will end and you'll get to the other side. And so Rick began to believe with Dr. Huff that Jesus was with them. And they kept on with the research. For almost a decade, they kept on as the storms of life raged. Government funding was cut, and people accused them of wasting their time. Their small but hard-working team kept pushing on. Then one day, Dr. Kopke called Dr. Huff into the lab. As soon as Jack walked in, he could sense something different in the room. The whole team could barely contain their excitement. Dr. Kopke pointed towards a microscope and said, "Why don't you take a look, Jack?" So Dr. Huff walked over to the microscope, and as he had countless times before, he positioned the glass slide and carefully adjusted the focus. You see, every time for almost a decade when Jack looked into this microscope, he saw this. Loud noise has destroyed the outer hair cells as well as a few of the inner ones. Where there should be row after row of hearing cells, there's nothing. No cells, no hearing. This is what a normal, healthy cochlea should look like. You can see 3 orderly rows of hair cells seen from the top down. The Huff team had been working day after day, night after long night, sometimes even 6 or 7 days a week, but on this particular day, everything had changed. And Dr. Huff knew that even before he looked into the microscope. But still, he almost couldn't believe it, and this is what he saw. Almost all the outer hair cells and even some of the inner hair cells had regenerated. They had done it. After a long time, Jack looked up from the microscope, his eyes aglow with a big smile on his face. He knew what this meant. This was the first time this kind of regeneration had happened in history. Their little team had done what everyone else thought was impossible. A dream had become reality. With tears in their eyes, Jack and Rick looked at each other and felt the goodness of God in that moment. Because the dream of God's heart was coming true, and they were on their way to seeing deafness defeated and hearing restored.
In 2012, just a few months after looking through that microscope, Dr. Huff passed away. He went on to be with Jesus, at peace with his life, knowing he had stayed true to his purpose. All his family and friends miss him, but his mission continues on. You see, Dr. Huff saw the potential in Dr. Kopke and his team. They carry on his vision, and even more amazing things are happening. Since then, the Huff team has created a bomb blast pill that can protect soldiers in war from losing their hearing when an IED blows up next to them. a treatment that is currently in FDA clinical trials as we speak. Soldiers will no longer have to come home and feel cut off and separated from their spouse or little boy or little girl. Since Jack looked in that microscope, they've not only seen hair cells regenerated, but they've actually restored hearing in live animals, bringing us one major step closer to their dream: a simple injection given during a clinic visit that will restore hearing, not just for the few who can afford cochlear implants or hearing aids, but for the millions of people worldwide who are hoping and praying for a better life. Jack lived his life for other people, believing in them and with them. And the vision of his heart is still alive today, that all who have ears will hear.